Hello! In this video, I'll set up the LaunchPad X to go into fader mode, and then use a fader control to control the intensity of an LED. Let's get started. First, I'm going to rename this tab from the meaningless flow 1, so I'll double click it, and then in the name field, we'll erase over this, and I'll type in LaunchPad X Fader Control LED. Click on Done. So now my tab has a much better name. The next thing we're going to need is a Midi Output. So we'll scroll down and find Midi Out. There it is. So we'll drag this out. We'll double click it to get to the properties. And we're going to change this to LaunchPad X MIDI 2. And click on Done. Now we're going to use a series of inject nodes so we can walk through this step by step and see how the LaunchPad X behaves and changes. So we'll scroll back to the very top here and drag out our first inject node. We'll double click this. We don't need this second line, so we can just get rid of it. And we're going to set message.payload to be JSON. And we're going to paste in a series of numbers that will instruct the LaunchPad X to enable Daw mode. So for this name, we'll type in Daw mode enable and click on Done. We can wire this up. The second step is we're going to want to enable the Daw Faders. So again, we'll add another inject node. So now we'll double click this. Again, we can get rid of this. We'll change message.payload again to be JSON. And we'll paste in the series of numbers that will tell the LaunchPad X to go into Daw Fader mode. So here I'll just type in Daw Fader and click on Done. Now we can wire this up. Now here I'll click on Deploy and we'll bring in a shot of the LaunchPad X. So you can see here the LaunchPad X as well as the circuit below. So now we'll go ahead and click on Daw mode enable. And now click on Daw Fader. The Daw Fader included a command to tell the faders to be in a vertical position rather than horizontal. So it's very light, but you might be able to see a slight green tint along the very bottom of the LaunchPad X. Right along here are the bottom of the faders, and they're a slight green by default. So as we press different points along a vertical axis, you can see that the faders go up to where I've pressed. Again, this is a fader, so as I press these different buttons, the fader will slowly get higher or lower depending on where I press. So we can change that to low, we could change this to very high. And each one of these vertical columns is an independent fader. It's giving out different pieces of information depending on which column I'm affecting. And by pressing the bottom row, I can set all the faders back to 0. Now I'm only going to be using one column. And there's a command that we can use to blank all of the faders. So we'll do that next. We'll drag out an inject node. We'll remove the overlay right now of the LaunchPad. We'll adjust this, double click it. We can get rid of this. We'll change this from timestamp to JSON. And we'll paste in a series of numbers that's going to tell the LaunchPad X to blank all of the faders. So we'll just call this exactly that. Daw blank all faders, and done. We'll adjust this a little, wire that up. The last thing we're going to want to do is make fader 1 red. So we'll drag this out, we'll double click this, we can get rid of the message at topic part, change timestamp to JSON, paste in the numbers that will tell the Launchpad to make fader 1 red. So for the name, we'll type in that, Daw Fader 1 red, and click on done. Again, we'll wire this up. Let's make these a little nicer. And now we'll click on deploy. So let's include the camera view of the LaunchPad X in the circuit. Now we'll go ahead and click on Daw blank all faders. You can see that the bottom row now is completely white like the rest. So now finally we'll click on Daw Fader 1 red. You can see that the bottom right is now red. So when I click on any of these buttons, the fader is now red and fading to wherever I click. We'll go ahead and put this back all the way down to the lowest setting. Now that the fader's set up, we'll add some nodes that will take the output of the LaunchPad X and control the intensity of the LED. So next, we're going to want an RPI GPI node out. So we'll scroll down and find that. Here's our output node. We'll put this over here. Let's switch the camera view to be zoomed in a little bit more so we can get a better shot of the actual circuit. You can see pin 19 has a 220 ohm resistor connected, which is then connected to the LED. We'll remove this overlay. We'll double click this node to get to the properties. We're going to work with pin 19. We want this to be a PWM output. We'll click on done. So now we need a MIDI in. So let's scroll back up and find MIDI in and pop this in here. We'll double click it to get to the properties, and for this we will want LaunchPad X MIDI 1. We'll click on done. Now we'll add in a debug node so we can see what the LaunchPad X is actually sending out as we press the different buttons. So we'll click on deploy, we'll go to debug, we'll clear it. Let's include the camera overlay of the LaunchPad X. I'll move this over just a bit so we can see the debug. Now as we press the various buttons on our fader, you can see the output coming out from the debug node. So the first number is always 7. And that's the note number in this case for this particular fader. So it's note 7, and then the output is anywhere from 0 to 128. So we know we need to work off of the first number being 7. We'll respond to that. So let's go back to just the web page. We can remove this debug node. And what we're going to put in first is a switch node. We'll double click the switch node. And for property, we're going to say message.payload.0. .0 meaning the first number that is in this set of numbers we get over here. And here we'll go down to number, and we want to pass this message when the first number is 7. So here we'll click on done. Now the next thing we want to do is add in a change node. Let's clean this up a little bit. So the switch node will pass this data on when this first number is 7. So now we're going to set this change node. We're going to set message.payload to be message.payload.1, meaning we're going to send this second number, even though it's 1, 0 is the first number, 1 is the second number. We're going to be passing on this second number as the payload itself and drop this first number. So we'll go ahead and click on done. We can now wire these up. And click on deploy. We can get rid of all this information. We don't need it anymore. So now let's get the camera view and a close-up of the circuit board. Now in the lower right of the screen, watch the LED's intensity as I press different buttons to change the intensity of the LED. So the fader is sending out a number between 0 and 128, and that number is being interpreted and changing the value that is being sent to the LED. And there you have it. That wraps it up for this video. Thank you very much for watching.